Good evening. Welcome to the East Lyme Board of Finance special meeting. Today is Monday, March 26, 2025. The time is 5:30 p.m. I would like to call the meeting to order and begin with a Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And I'd also just like to point out that in addition to the four of us, Scott McAllister is attending the meeting through Zoom. Next on the agenda is delegations. Delegations is the point of the meeting where any member of the public who wants to address any of the items on the agenda tonight is free to do so. Does anyone up there? No? Okay, thank you. So on to new business, and we are going to begin or continue with our budget reviews, which is multiple evening process where we walk through some of the more significant budgets from a dollar perspective, and also a major changes that we want to delve into more deeply. So the first one is information technology. Dan Cleary is not able to be here tonight. Dan's our IT director, but Kevin Gervais, our finance director, is intimately familiar with it and can probably answer any questions we have.
All right. So if you want to switch over. Okay, so it looks like a rather large increase to the IT budget, but there's a number of things that are happening with this budget. I believe approximately $40,000 to $50,000 has been moved from emergency management to IT. Let me look here. It's somewhere over here.
And while you're looking at that, one of the things that really kind of came out through our CIP process, Capital Improvement Committee process, was looking at, where do things belong in the budget. And Dan has really done a great job pulling different related areas together, and so there was an effort to kind of make the budgeting process IT related and capital related more cohesive.
Sorry, the enable editing button. What is going on here? Okay, so from other fund, between police and emergency management, approximately 70,000 has been moved to the IT budget. So last year we were at $43,000. This year we're at $116,000. Something I thought was kind of interesting. You'll notice down here there's $7,500 in both columns. The $7,500 was double accounted for in last year's budget, and when we combine the two of them, that's where we noticed that. So it was in double budgets. Now it's only in one budget. So the budget's getting a little tighter. So that's for other IT services. Just going from the top, I guess, personnel services, the 15% increase. There is not an additional person in this budget, but if you remember, in the current year we are in, we hired a half full-time equivalent IT engineer that started in November, so we only covered 7 months of that salary. This year we have to cover the remaining 5 months, right? So there's not an increase in personnel. Now there's 3 individuals in the IT office, but now we have to pay for 3 full salaries, right? Because we only paid for 2.5 in the current budget year. Rich?
In the narrative, it looked like there was an addition of a new IT help tech.
So in the department requested budget, he requested $332,000. that had that
That's
additional
really-
IT triage, kind of at the front
Yep,
lines.
yep.
But with this budget year, all new positions, with the
Okay.
exception of the firemen, were eliminated.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Yep. I don't want to touch their narrative as we make changes because that's what they kind of wrote.
Right.
It's kind of a little dicey when I start dicing up their narratives. So I leave the narratives alone. We just make changes to the front worksheet here.
And I think too, just, IT has gotten much more complicated. And, we hadn't invested too much in the whole IT. I think when I first started on the Board of Finance, the IT was being split between Public Works Director and the Police Chief, with one person kind of handling all email, stuff like that. So
Yep.
there really is a need. It's funny, for the first time I tried to do a AI question or survey and asked what is the typical Connecticut municipal budget for IT,
Millions.
and it came back 20% of the town budget. So, they did say that it was kind of hard because different towns categorize things in different sections, whatever. But I think IT budgets are growing.
Yeah, and I know IT Director Cleary. I believe it's in his professional group there he's in. I think it's one IT professional for every 40 employees. And now that we have more than 160 full-time employees, we should have probably north of right around 4 or 5 IT people. And that's why I think he was looking to hire that help desk person. The initial, did you restart the computer? Did you try and plugging it and replugging it back in? And then have, elevate the people that are currently here into more technical roles. Like I know one of them, the person we just hired is an IT engineer and works over at the public safety building, assisting in the cars and the body cams and all that jazz. So I think this is probably an area in the future where there'll probably still be challenges with keeping this budget down.
Yeah, the other thing I think that kind of jumped out was the miscellaneous supplies. It's a big number, and does it deserve a better description? So
the miscellaneous supplies, I believe I cut it, so I just want to check this because I think it was cut back to 30 or 32. But the miscellaneous supplies is essentially all the computers for the town. So the reason why that jumped from the $8,200 to the $34,000, $8,000 for IT, keyboards, mice, new monitors, all the little HDMI cords, docking stations, all the stuff to run the couple hundred stations there is. He had in the capital budget a computer replacement program.
Mm-hmm.
Computers nowadays are more of an operating cost. Computer, could be this. I think this computer's like $1,000, if that.
Mm-hmm.
That's not really a capital item, and we're not buying them really in bulk. It's kind of one-off. So it made more sense to move that, especially with our push to cash capital, to just move it in the operating budget.
I agree with that. I'm just thinking we can, should it be computer supplies as opposed to miscellaneous? Sounds like
that sounds great. Usually, for something like this, we would probably call it technical supplies because it's department specific. Yeah. And I believe, if I'm mistaken, that's probably the name in our accounting system anyways, technical supplies.
okay.
So let me just see real quick. I just want to make sure because I
Not a
thought that
big
was
deal.
cut
I'm
back.
just, miscellaneous sounds like
I just think there was
paper. Yeah.
Let's call it peripherals.
I just want to make sure.
So while he's looking at that,
Miscellaneous hardware called that.
yeah. Does anyone have any other questions in regard to the IT budget?
And then the only other there's some larger increases, but the large jump in the police, fire marshal, EMD, a large portion of that is being driven by Axon body cam. So you can see the body cam contract we had was about $36,000. That jumped with the new contract to $84,000. And it sounds like a big increase, but is Mason behind me? He is. Yeah. And so he can speak a little to that because it's not quite that crazy of a jump.
Good evening. All right, so when we initially implemented the Axon body cam system,
Just one second, could you identify yourself?
yep, Mike
Say who you
Masick,
are,
Chief
but
of Police, East Lyme. Yes, sorry about that. So when we initially implemented it, there was a little bit of money that OPM had that each town was able to go after, and it was a very small pool of money during those conversations back then. Actually, it was November 12th of 2020 meeting, Board of Finance, and what we had done at that point, Chief Finkelstein was here, we'd actually front-loaded that contract, so we had done a $151,000 appropriation. So with that being said, the remainder of the contract over the 5 years was reduced down to $31,987.06. So that was the annual payment for that for those years. If you were to divide that $151,000 that we front loaded and added that on top of the $31,000 per year, we were actually paying $62,307.28. So the increase that we're seeing this year is $18,298. So it's essentially only increased $18,000 per year. So the reasoning for that is, we've added more officers since that time 5 years ago. So we have some more hardware cost associated with the contract, as well as some licensing fees. By committing to this a little bit earlier, because the contract was more, I was able to save the town $47,135.71 in this new contract that we had to sign off on. There is no OPM money available for this anymore, so this is one of those unfunded liabilities that came out of the police accountability bill. It's been a huge asset to the town. I think that every town who didn't have these has implemented them. So just unfortunately, we have a little bit of raise in cost. I think, the grand scheme of things, you look at the 18,000, I don't have my calculator in front of me just to do the percent. It's not that large of a percentage increase year over year for this upcoming contract that we do have. But it is an increase, I think. Unfortunately, as we're going to see through the IT budget and everybody's budgets that you're presented throughout the course of the town's budget this year, there a lot of drivers are going to be IT related for percentage increases this year. But that's how we arrived at where we're at now.
Thank you, Chief. Anyone questions in regard to the IT budget? Okay, thank you. Emergency management, we had that on the agenda for this evening. Julie Wilson, in charge of that department, could not be here. She offered to have us play her presentation that she did to the Board of Selectmen, which we can, I've seen it already, anyone can watch it whenever, but also the budget itself dropped by $50,000. So other than if someone has a question, we can always put it out to her and review her answer at the next meeting.
Yeah, so we can see the two lines that were moved,
Yeah.
the radio maintenance line and then miscellaneous supplies. So those two items were moved to IT.
Yep. And Chief, I don't know if you have some other.
I'm
Okay.
just up next.
Okay. Okay. You look like you were ready to ask. So.
I just wonder with the line for the director's salary, I believe last year, with everything that was going on, something was arranged with Julie to have a different compensation to compensate for assuming some of those duties. Is that back to the police chief now?
So right now, the deputy emergency management director receives a stipend of $250 a week. It's roughly $12,000 a year, I believe it is. And so in this budget that is presented here has the stipend for the director position as well as the deputy director position. Because nothing is finalized, so this is as if there's a stipend for the public, for the police chief. The stipend's still there for that, as well as the salary for the deputy emergency management director. Does that answer your question?
I think I'll have to think on it.
Okay. Well, you can catch me afterwards.
Okay, thank you.
So, Rich, if I could just try, I think I know where you're going with this.
Yeah.
So I do not receive any of that stipend as the acting chief of police.
Right.
The only thing that has changed for me from that position was my literal base pay to his base pay.
Oh, okay.
So it does not include that because I do not have the emergency management director title attached to me personally,
Right.
as he did. So just I wanted to clarify because I know there's been a lot of comments in the media and on social media as well. So while there's a lot of, hey, we're paying two chiefs. However, I have worked here for 23 years, so I already did have a salary. So yes, while I have a little bump in base pay, it's not essentially paying the same amount that you were also paying for Chief Finkelstein. So I just wanted to make sure that was kind of cleared up.
Okay.
Do you know which Board of Selectmen meeting her presentation was?
I will. I'll get that for you.
You could send us a link for that.
Oops, sorry, I forgot to share my screen. All right, is there any other questions for?
Yeah, so otherwise I have to go look at them all.
Everybody good then with? All right, so this brings us to dispatch. And Chief, I assume you're going to do dispatch, animal control, and police?
Correct. Is that
Stop shop.
me doing this?
You got some metal on. I think it just interferes with it. Yeah, any that all
Here.
yeah.
Okay.
And as you start your presentation, could you just explain what extrapolated funding realized? Just that was sort of in the narrative. I just want to make sure everyone understands what we're referring to there.
Under which narrative?
The very first one, and the second one. So the dispatchers. Oh. Scott, did you have a?
Oh, he's still muted.
There-
Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Okay, great. I did have an IT question, unless I'm too late.
No, go ahead.
Okay, yeah, thanks. So, Kevin, I'm not sure if you're the right person to answer or not. I thought what Denise said about the fact that other towns have a 20% of their entire budget for their IT department. That was illuminating. I didn't appreciate that, but I think based on my own experience in the workforce, clearly there is a lot of new technological developments, and of course they're increasing. And the only way our IT department stays up with that is to have professional development opportunities and additional training. And I think I heard somebody mention that maybe there could be a fourth person down the road, but I feel as if some of the budget, at least what I read, should be going for training. And so I'm just asking if I've missed that, if it's in there, or is it just named in some way that I don't understand? Is there additional training activities for IT department to sort of keep them technologically savvy?
There is. Hold on one second. I thought it was like $3,000.
Gosh.
It's a tough budget year. Internal IT training and materials, we budgeted $3,600 for training.
Is that training of the IT staff, or is that for them to? That's not for them to train other members of the town government.
Correct. This is internal, for like professional development for the IT staff.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that. I didn't appreciate that.
Yep.
And I think Dan is very active in sort of his industry, and I think
Yeah, so I-
stays abreast of all.
Yeah, our IT director came from the public sector, the private sector, and so he brings a pretty good wealth of knowledge. So a lot of the new vendors we have are, he's bringing over crowd strikes and things like that. Updating our vendors to best practices.
All right, helpful to know. Thank you.
Thanks.
IT dispatch.
Okay, so looking at those two particular lines, so it's going to be under the part-time dispatcher, where it mentions the extrapolation, and then the overtime line.
James, swap out the screen.
So what we're looking at is if you go back to, I guess, 2024 actual expense when this was set up in that way, and then also the overtime, because that was reduced down to 157 for the current year. What's happened is there's been a contractual change with the dispatchers, right? So the way that shifts used to get filled, the first right of refusal would always go to the part-timers. So if say, a full-time dispatcher took a specific shift off, it would go out, and then the part-time dispatcher would be offered that shift first, right? And of course, that's at a reduced rate. Now with the contractual change where that first right of refusal has been shifted over to the full-time dispatchers, so when a full-time employee takes a shift off, it has to go to the full-time employees first to backfill that vacancy. So with that, as you look at the numbers between the part-time and the overtime lines, that's why you're seeing that adjustment there. It's to compensate for the full-time employees picking up those shifts due to, personal time, sick time, vacation time, at a higher rate per hour versus the part-time personnel coming in.
So that was through a collective bargaining
Correct.
change.
Yes.
Which ended up being more costly for the town.
Right. Yes. The dispatcher's line number, the first one we're looking at, again, because of that person going in there, and then a contractual raise, which they'll cover for that. The longevity shift differential, now, looking at this, we put out the employees, we look at, okay, how long has each employee been here, figure out what bracket they're in for the longevity, and we're going to see this when we get to the police department as well, because there's a significant increase there for accounting purposes. So looking at that plus the shift differential, since we've moved over to Munis versus MCSJ, because I tried running some numbers even before I came in here, and that's actually why I was running a couple minutes behind, because for I don't know if it's a rights thing on my personal profile for it, but when I run the year to date, because I like to have the numbers in front of me, okay, what percent are we at as of today? So that way, if you ask a question, I can say, and I know in the PD one, especially the overtime, we're at 67% versus, where we should be at 75% plus for this time of year. So that's a good thing. Obviously, we're not spending as much money. What I was unable to find was it gives a 4-year projection, right? So I'm showing like a minus $1,900 here. When I run the report, it shows up on my report. When I go to that specific account and run it, it's showing that I've spent no money in that particular account. So I'm confused as to where that is. And when I look at the journal entry is not as, well, MCSJ was a little older, kind of like a DOS type running program. It was very easy to see those journal entries right across, see who took it out, where that money went, whether it was interdepartmental budget transfer, because looking at where we are today, specifically in a dispatch budget, I'm aware that I have to do a budget transfer soon. So it's just going to be a question with Kevin and Mitch to look at.
Yeah, it's a new system.
Yeah, right. And I know everything. They're doing an awesome job putting everything in there. We're just not 100% caught up on that part.
Yeah. So I think. So just diving in here, I see the $1,900 that the account's negative.
Yeah.
But I'm looking at about $130 a week in expenses, and if we just go to the last 2 weeks, the first week of the year was $784, and then the most recent week was $994. So I'll just look to see if maybe someone was miscoded or someone was just working every midnight shift. But that seems awfully high for having 25% of the budget in 1 week.
Right.
So we'll just investigate that and see what's
Okay.
going on there.
All right. So when you look at the longevity, and that's kind of what I did here on the backside under the explanation is, gave you the shift differential, times the shifts times the days, which gives you basically roughly a $7,008 amount, and the longevity for this year is projected to be at $2,050. So with those two numbers combined, that's how I came up with that. So that's why we're seeing a little bit of an.
And longevity is the annual payout for.
Right. Once an employee is here beyond the first 5 years, there's brackets for that, and each one has a specific dollar amount attached to it. And beyond that, all the other lines have stayed at 0.00%.
And are we at, I know there've been some turnover with the dispatchers. Are we at 8 dispatchers
Yeah,
now?
we're at 8 right now. However, one is possibly thinking about transferring over to the police side, is a former police officer and misses the job. So that potentially may open a spot for us, but I think that would be a very short-lived spot because we do have a couple of dispatchers in the queue who were interested in coming here to work. So I don't think if that officer looks at, or that dispatcher looks at making that jump over to our side of the building, we wouldn't have a vacancy for very long. We would immediately bring in, those other dispatchers from the last go-around. And one actually just recently sent an email still expressing interest in coming over. So if we do have a hole there, it will be very short-lived.
I'm just wondering if, because of this change to overtime going to the full-timers first, is there, is there a tipping point where
Yeah, so you
better
look,
off
I
with
see what
another
you're saying.
dispatcher instead of the overtime?
Right. When you look at the way, because the police department runs the same way, right? We run a 5-3 schedule, so you're almost having to add another, I guess we'll call it a third, right? You probably almost have to do 4 dispatchers to fill, because once you lay the schedule out and based on their work schedule, we have to essentially be able to plug those holes in. So one person, and we've presented this numerous times, one person doesn't really fill that hole, that void, because it creates the same problem. You're actually looking at almost, because we start off with what, two shifts a week already. So there's 2 shifts automatically a week already that go unfilled. So if we do bring one in, yep, that's potentially going to help, but we're also going to raise, the dispatcher line by a salary. So if we move up to 9, yes, we'll increase the salary line. However,
But how much would it decrease the overtime?
well, that's where it gets a little bit tricky, because now that employee's earning, PTO time. So if they start taking time off, we're back in the same boat. That's why I'm saying it would take multiple people to fill essentially like one spot. So you have that overlap. So if somebody is out, you're still covered.
All right. Does anyone else have? Go ahead, Rich.
Yes, I do. I noticed this in a couple of other departments as well. For the personnel services, there's a line for training payroll. There's also the operating expense for training. And I understand that the training payroll pays somebody while they're at training, but wouldn't their salary or overtime line cover that?
It could, however, we would just realize, another deficit within the overtime in itself. So, because you're essentially taking that money, it's been separated just so we have a clear picture of what it costs to keep people trained. The police department does the same thing. I'm not sure if the fire department does as well, but I think it makes it easier for us to pick that out and say, hey, look, it's going to cost us, in this case, $7,000 for the year. And when we look at the actual expense from the prior year, it was basically $6,000. I think for the sake of kind of like a little transparency and a little bit easier way to review the budget, I mean, we could easily remove that line and take that number and put it back in there. However, if we were to completely erase that line and erase the dollar amount attached to it, we're going to see a little bit of an increase in the overtime line, because that overtime that's being expended right now is going just to fill shifts. So if we add in the training to that as well, we
It's a
still
little
have
more
to.
noise in there.
Right, yeah, kind of like
And so
washes
by-
their hands.
By their contract,
Right,
anything that they do for training is a paid expense.
Right.
Rather than just being part of the job.
correct. Because most of the trainings that do occur require them to be, away from their desk, away from the building. They're being sent out somewhere else.
Okay. And any possibility to bring the training in rather than sending it out?
We have looked at that for sure, because there are definitely some aspects. I mean, everybody in any type of service capacity, training's ongoing, right? None of us are trained up to capacity, so
Right.
to bring someone on, we're doing the same thing with the police department. We have a lot of officers who have gotten the method of instruction certification. So if we can bring in some of these trainings that are required by the state, at least on the police side, and as well as dispatch, and we can do them in-house, it saves us a lot of money, and we are actively working on that.
Okay, thank you, Mike.
You're welcome.
And I can't see if Scott has his hand up or at all. No. You're good, Scott. Everybody else good with dispatch then? So next on the budget is animal control.
Okay, so just to, as we start animal control, just realize that there is, we do share animal control with the town of Waterford, so while some things, even in today's current numbers that I ran, are a little bit over, what we do at the end of the fiscal year is we provide a weekly report. Then an annual report goes to finance. Finance looks at it and looks at our part of the billing. We submit that bill over to Waterford, and then they, submit a check back to us to cover that. So what we're looking at is with Allison Ryan going to a full-time animal control position, we're seeing a little bit of a raise here in the ACO line, and then they have they also have a little bit of a contractual raise that they get there as well. So last year, I think we were looking at, they're a little bit under, because she came on full-time, not for the entire fiscal year. So it was just a matter of doing the calculation to bring that up to cover their line right through the end of the fiscal year. The overtime this year, the main animal control officer had some personal health issues, was out for quite a bit, so there was a little bit of an influx in expenditures in overtime. However, that also does cover after-hours call-outs to the town of East Lyme and or the town of Waterford. And then if we do have animals in the shelter, they are required to feed and clean those animals, and they get 4-hour blocks on the weekends, Saturday and Sunday, and they normally split those up at 2 different times, like 2 hours mid-morning, 2 hours early evening, so that way the animals are taken care of over the weekend until they're back on duty, come Monday morning. But there is I do provide an annual report to the police commission that shows all the calls. I don't have that here in front of me. I probably could have brought that if you had a question on it, or I can definitely provide it to you guys, just to kind of show their activity over the course of the year, and it just give you a better picture of what really goes on.
Yeah, she's presented to us before.
Okay, great.
If you could just send it to our
Illuminated.
town email.
Yes, absolutely.
Appreciate it.
Okay, everyone good?
Question?
And everything else is staying status quo at all at 0%.
Okay, Scott, do you have a question?
Yeah, so thanks for this, Chief. Can you just elaborate a little bit on the relationship with Waterford? And for example, if our animal control officer is out, whether it's because of, illness or just time off, do we get covered by Waterford animal control officers?
No, so we as a town of East Lyme, with the contract that the towns have signed on to the memorandum of agreement is the town of East Lyme provides the 2 animal control officers. So we, as the town, have 2 full-time officers. So Waterford currently does not have an animal control officer per se. Officer Rob Yucknick, he retired from the town of Waterford as a police officer, and his final post there was an animal control officer. Worked for Groton for a short period, and once we had an opening again, after an older animal control officer left, he came on board. We brought Allison on as a part-time animal control officer, and with the amount of calls and the volume over the course of the year, and for instances like you just brought up, sickness or family emergency, they're out for an extended period. We brought Allison on at full-time based on that fact, and again, like all the call-outs.
So we are our own backup.
Correct. Yeah. If we have to rely on another town such as New London, because we do share the animal control shelter with the city of New London, they have assisted us in the past as we've assisted them.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Rich?
Yes. Again, with the training, I mean, this is good. The one line was zeroed out and one went down $1,000. But I'm just curious, was the training under personnel services then thrown into the overtime?
Yeah, so we looked at, there was a very minimal expense, because what happens is with having these 2 on, if, for example, Allison was just up in Boston. She had training on Monday and Tuesday this week. Is going to be bringing back some good things, some policy changes. Does that training in lieu of shift. So we were able. We sat down. We looked at what trainings are mandated by the state of Connecticut through Department of Agriculture. That's where this comes out of. And then what do we do locally and what's out there. So it just, for how minimal it was, that's what made sense.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Okay.
All right, on to regular police.
Okay.
Jane, John, switch it over. We'll do section by section so I can zoom in a little more.
All right. So I guess starting right at the top line, that is not where I get paid from. That is for the chief position. There was a contractual raise for that position for when that comes up in July. Part-time clerical, again, that is Kathy Miller. That's based on between approximately 25 hours a week.
That's Leanne.
Sometimes what's that?
First one's Leanne.
Well, there was a 0% increase. I didn't know if you wanted me to go over the 0% lines.
Oh, gotcha.
Okay, so I was just going to jump down to.
Yep.
So she has a raise coming in for her as well. Police officers, yeah, we see 11.77% increase. This is driven by a couple of things here. So contractually, the officers have saved holidays, and in the past, for quite some time, it was not into the police budget. It was in the town. So it's not, while it's raising our budget line 11.77%, it's not raising the overall town budget. It doesn't have an effect because the money was already here and accounted for. It's been a contractual item for years. It's kind of like the IT budget. We're just absorbing something, so that's giving us that increase.
I think this is where the police officers are entitled to get paid for a holiday.
Correct.
But they'd been paid out at the year end, or
Yeah.
we were budgeting for it in one, or we weren't budgeting.
So if you want to
It-
switch
it
over
was-
real quick.
Yeah, it was. So
I
this
just-
makes it more transparent.
Correct.
So this is how every officer is entitled to 108 hours of holiday pay, and if you add all that up, it's $137,000, roughly the cost of 2 full-time police officers.
Right, so this year with, the police commission, has come to the town, the board of selectmen, board of finance, a few years ago with a plan to hire, 2 officers per year over a 6-year period, which would have brought us up to 12. By adding this number into here, it's increased that line. I don't want to use the word artificially, but there's an artificial increase essentially because it's our budget, yes, is going up, but by dollars that already exist and were being paid out in all the previous years and just coming into here. So we had asked for 2 officers again this year, and through the budget process, they were reduced. So essentially, just like Kevin said, the amount of money that the 137,429, when you look at, if we were to bring 2 brand new officers in at the step 1, it roughly amounts to that same dollar amount, right? So if we left them in there, it would be bringing up that specific line about $300,000 or just a hair under it, 285 somewhere in there.
So the holiday pay itself is a 5% salary, not salary increase, but
Line
the increase is a line
Line.
increase by 5%
Right.
itself.
So then there's contractual, raises come July for the existing officers that are in here. So by adding that, I don't know what the percentage, Kevin, that number would have jumped this up to.
Sorry, I just don't want to make people dizzy. Yeah, so I think with the contractual obligations and all that's about 5 1/4, 5 and a half ish. So half of the increase for that 11.77% is attributable to the holiday pay. The rest of it's attributable to just step increases
Right.
every 18 months, is it?
Yes.
18 or 24?
Yeah, until they max out at their top step.
Yeah.
Okay.
So just below that, foot patrol parade duty, overtime line, again, those are to reflect just the contractual raises in there. The foot patrol parade duty, that takes care of all our events, East Lyme Day, Light Parade, Memorial Day Parade, anything that we do as a town event. We've got obviously the police department covers the security, the traffic control, and all those events, and there's a cost to that. I think East Lyme Day runs us about almost $15,000 by the time that whole day is over. So there's expenses to this. The next line that's fairly large is the longevity shift differential, and we're going to run into the same thing. Again, just doing out the base calculation from previous years, it didn't really account for everything that those 3 items mean. So longevity is for all the officers who are beyond that 5-year mark. Each one falls into a specific bracket with a specific dollar amount attached to it. Shift differential, at a minimum, it's 60 cents per hour. There's no difference between evening and midnights. We have a 3-man minimum, so that's 6 officers per day at 9 1/4 hours times 365 days. I've done that calculation in the justification line here. And then the detectives are contractually offered a stipend. Each of them get $3,000. It's done 2 times a year, $1,500 in July 1 and then one after January 1st. So by bringing all those numbers together, we're looking at $31,054. So that's why we're seeing a significant increase in there, because again, I think the line, especially years ago, was extremely low. There was 5,000 or 6,000 money was just coming from another spot in town. So it's being brought back into our budget, from other places. So we're just doing that transparent accounting thing here and getting it in the right place.
Okay. So far, any questions? Yeah, Rich?
Yeah. So essentially, for the police officers line with the holiday pay and the longevity, we're kind of making up for lack of accounting for that in the past?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Then that makes sense to me now.
Or unbudgeted.
unbudgeted in the
Unbudgeted
past,
expenses.
and that's
Yeah.
why we were having the transfers through
Correct.
the year to cover those
Yep.
things.
Right.
Okay. In the narrative for, I think the police officers, is that incorrect with saying the addition of two
Right, so
officers, or is-
normally what occurs is, at least in my time of having some time with the budget for probably the past decades, we normally leave some of those things in here, right? Because the final cut comes from the Board of Finance. So, I have commissioners here tonight who are going to speak on behalf of the looking at adding 2 officers to the thing. So in the end, right, once we have that final proposed and you guys say, no, absolutely not, it's not happening, or yes, go ahead, I make that final change here that's presented back to Kevin. So once this thing moves forward, then that's how this reads.
Okay, so that figure,
So the
does that
fig, so
include the
you're
rolling in of the holiday pay?
no, so you're looking at
plus-
2 different figures, because you have
Okay.
2809,208 on
Okay.
that back line in the justification, then you go up front, so that's where it's showing you the difference, the 2649. So if you were to subtract those 2 numbers, that's the difference, what it would be to bring on 2 brand-new officers.
Oh, okay.
So if
At
you
that
added
point.
the 2 officers,
Then
it would be 2,809.
2809.
Right.
And that
Correct.
was removed by the first selectman and the
Correct.
board of selectmen.
Correct.
Oh.
Right, so it just gave you, I didn't want to remove the actual number, so you could at least see the comparison and say, okay, well, look, here's 2,600,000, here's 2,800,000. The difference between, if we add the 2, it's going to cost us this. If we stay
Right.
with the reduction, we're going to stay here for what's on the actual front page with the real numbers.
Okay. Sorry, I just got confused with hearing that the overtime kind of equaled, the holiday pay equaled like 2 officers worth of pay. And then I see 2
Right.
officers here.
Yeah.
So,
Right.
and then the other one that I had a question about was and this might be again something that was just left in the part-time administrative narrative, that we're requesting to move it from 25-hour part-time to 40-hour per week full-time position.
Right,
That's
which got
staying as
shut.
a part-time.
And that got shut down.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Just one quick, did you also have an annual report, that you, oh, yeah, if you-
You want me to go?
Yeah, go ahead, Scott.
Okay, I'm sorry, I didn't realize. So kind of was just curious, maybe it's a presentation that's coming up, but I was interested in sort of trends in the number of calls and crime patterns in our town, maybe relative to other, comparable Connecticut towns. Which way what's the direction of these crime patterns, and how do you see the police needing to react to that?
So in looking at, we do have an annual report to answer.
I think I'm on the same line, maybe you could send that to us.
Right, I can definitely send that report to you, because again, presenting to the police commission, we provide,
It helps, because we just get numbers, and it's nice to see the story behind
right,
it.
to see the story behind it, right.
Mike,
Yes.
if you could also send the information where we compared our population base and our police to other towns.
Yeah.
Because we're significantly behind most other towns.
Right. So, yeah, as far as the officers go per 1,000, yes, we are behind. That's why we're trying to stay on track with the addition of it.
Laura?
Yes.
In the training line narrative, there's a note that in-service training availability has been reduced and outsourced to a much higher cost. Can you explain why that is? Is it just that in-service isn't available?
So right, so when I first started, and even 15 years ago, the police academy in Meriden hosted a ton of training. You could go on their website, and there was a full-blown catalog like a university. And What's happened over the years is the state has reduced money, so it's reduced the cost because they pay for it, and essentially we, as all the municipalities, the towns, the state police, were benefiting from the trainings that they were hosting. It was meeting, statutory requirements for our 60 hours that's needed at minimum for every 3 years. And so now what's happening is they're bringing in specialists. So then we had to raise our training line several years ago, and it's increased because they first started out at, okay, well, we're going to charge you $50 to come to this class. Now there's classes that are upwards of $500. There's outsourced courses, first line supervisor that I'm looking at. I have a sergeant that needs to attend that. I'm trying to find one that is relatively inexpensive and close by. Some of the ones that are being presented to me are $2,500 just for that class, $4,000 for that class, and I have to pay for hotel and travel expenses, where that was something, if anything, maybe it cost a town, an hour, a half hour each way of travel expense just to go up to Meriden. And that's why, to go back to your earlier comment of why we're looking to bring these trainings in-house, because it's just like everything else, it's getting a little out of control. So we did a lot with IPTM, International Police Technology Management down in Florida. They would come up. I went through my DUI course through there. I went through the basic investigation class, the interview interrogation. I mean, they did a lot of the major component things, and these are week plus long classes, and the state just, ran out of funding for that. So the availability is just not there.
Thank you.
I think I jumped on Scott, so I don't know if you got that answer to that question.
Scott, do you have any other?
Just the one. I mean, I appreciate that we're a little bit behind some other local towns, and I guess the detail will be in the annual report that
Yes.
we'll get a chance to review. That's fine by me. Thanks.
Paul, did you have anything on?
No, that was it. That was-
Okay. All right. Moving forward with that. Maybe back to the spreadsheet.
Yeah, so the next line we're looking at is the telephones. So that encompasses police department telephones, internet-related expenses. Emergency management and IT are working on a solution to bring all those together, and I think we're starting to realize a little bit of reduction because we had multiple phone systems in the town. So there's a cost to getting, I think, part of the actual physical phone itself. But once we get onto that system, it's going to be much cheaper. Just consolidating these services, so that'll cover us there. Professional business expenses. So what this covers is membership in the Connecticut Police Chiefs Association. The LEC stands for Law Enforcement Council, and the International Association of Chiefs of Police. It's being increased to meet. There's an increase in fees proposed in the fiscal year by the organization. So the Law Enforcement Council is who we contract with. They're out of Norwich. There was 19 towns. I think we're down. 15 towns are involved with them. They do our promotional process. So they do the physical testing. They do the oral boards. They run an academy right now, so we send them to the academy for the 60 hours required by mandate for officers to be certified in the state of Connecticut. They also run a course for that, so we can send officers close by to Norwich and get 40 of those 60 hours knocked out in a week. Whereas if I had to go out and pull vendors in for each one of these classes, then it would be a much larger expense. So it's an invaluable asset that we have to us. There's a lot of regional things that come out of there. For their academy, they're looking at reducing the cost of that in the near future with some grant funding, hopefully. So if at some point, we get another brand-new officer that needs to go to the academy, we can send them up there. I'll see, for a free cost, then there'll be no tuition, and there's another savings for us. So there's a lot of good things that they've picked up for us, where the Police Officer Standard Training Council, Meriden, has kind of dropped the ball on, so that this has been our other go-to place, and it's been fantastic. There was a small increase in fees in the Connecticut Chiefs Police Association, and what that does is that gives us, the executive in the department unfettered access to a lot of resources and networking throughout the state. So it was a nominal increase. It wasn't that much for this year, but we're accounting for that in here as well. Other. All right, so the other purchase expenses, lines covering towing, vehicle inspections, yearly fee for NESPIN, which is an information network that's law enforcement only and sensitive, as well as tower dump and data requests for various cell phone carriers when needed for a related case. It was actually reduced quite a bit, and unfortunately, what I'm going to find out is we just received a tower dump bill, and it was kind of high, right? So if we have a case where we are required to go to one of these cell phone carriers, do a search warrant, because that's how we get the records from them, and get that data where it used to be free, they're now charging $250 plus just for that tower dump. So to them, they found another revenue stream that they used to do for free, and there's now an associated cost with it. It's going to be kind of like the prisoner expenses. Those are moving targets. All I can do is look at previous years and say, here's my best guess to how close we can be, because we could have, we've averaged about 250 prisoners at the police department over the course of each year. So the average is 250. Some of them are here with us for an extended weekend. So we have to provide meals for those individuals while they're with us. And if there's a holiday on a Friday or a Monday, well, they're now staying for 3 days, and that's 3 meals per day. Currently, we contract with McDonald's. We do have a charge account now set up with Stop and Shop, where when we first started this, McDonald's was great. It was $3-4 a meal, tax free, that we had. They're now upwards of almost $16 for a very simple meal from them. So I went out, looked, found another avenue, and Stop and Shop is going to, will be providing them with $2 meals. So, it's $6 a day versus almost $45 a day that we've been spending. So it's hard. I think these two lines kind of intertwine. Yes, they're separate, but they're both moving targets that, there's just no way to say, hey, there's, it's going to cost $5,000 this year. It could cost us $15,000, or it could cost us $500. So it's a best guess at looking at previous years and what those expenses were. Prior to this going forward, weren't made aware that those dumps were going to cost as much as they did. So now, I have to keep that in mind for this upcoming fiscal year, that I may have to do a transfer from another line at some point to cover those associated costs if we end up with a lot of them. Uniforms is up 1.21%, and again, that's just to cover a minor increase. Miscellaneous supplies. So lines utilized for office supplies, copy machines, investigative supplies, crime scene things, everything that is associated with, dealing with crime scenes and or the detective. So latent fingerprints, impression things, fingerprint power, disposable brushes, all these things have a cost to them. We have contracts with LexisNexis. Again, that's another tool, investigative tool for us. Law enforcement sensitive, that just gives us access to information. Contractors increased by 3% this year. Historically, more than half this line has been spent on office supplies. The increase is sought to look at cover overall increases in supplies as well as fund additional postage needs, printing, legal ads, and purchases of naloxone, so Narcan, that's what that is. Those are fairly expensive per unit.
Just a quick question on that. I know a lot of organizations require potential candidates to be fingerprinted.
Yes.
Do we do that for other people, and if so, do we charge?
So we do. We just started charging for fingerprinting because we were one of the only departments literally around that were not doing it. So it's now $20 for fingerprinting purposes. So we will start to realize this year a small revenue stream from that.
Mike,
Yes.
if I could back up to the tower dumping.
Okay.
Are there any efforts from the police departments in the state to lobby the state to kind of get a handle on the cell providers, or to try to eliminate that charge? Because I remember with texting,
Right.
originally you got charged for text.
For text, right.
But it was just something that was open space in their networks, and I'm wondering if any efforts are being made.
I think what we're going to see, because this is fairly new, that we are going to see that. So like the CPA sends me, continuous legislative updates, House bills that are going, what status they're in, whether they're in a public hearing, or if the bill is just presented, or if it's moved forward to another committee. At the last CPCA thing, this was brought up because they do have a local organization out of Saybrook that does a lot of the legislative watchdog stuff, and they are up at the Capitol frequently. So I think this is going to be one of those areas because it's now another unrealized expense that was thrown onto a department who already has a budget that was set months and months and months ago. And now it's like, okay, well, now you're charging us for this. And fortunately for us, it's not a homicide case, but we've had some pretty extensive cases recently, burglaries that are their high-end dollar amounts that, that data is invaluable to place a person, in an area, especially if we have a good lead on them. And, to say, hey, we're not going to pay for that. And I think they've found a niche where they're like, ooh, hey, they really need this data. They're not saying no, and we have it. So I think they will get away from it or get away with it for a little while, but I think they are going to start to meet opposition once these bills start coming in as they are.
Okay, so we should probably contact our local representatives and senators.
Absolutely, yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Public relations, looking at a little bit of an increase there. That takes care of the National Night Out. Where's my language? National Night Out, Citizens Police Academy, items related to distribute to the public. Do ads in the paper if we have to, found property things. An example of, for the public, we had the Girl Scouts at the PD last night and didn't really have anything to, hand out to them. So we cover just little trinket type things of that nature when we have, events like that. And again, the National Night Out, since we've implemented that a couple of years ago, that's been a huge success up at Flanders Elementary. First year, we had more people than we anticipated. And then the following year, word spread and it was bigger. And we hope, I think last year we were canceled because of the weather. So hopefully this year we'll have the same, we'll have good weather and another huge turnout. That's where the addition is there. And again, prisoner expenses, moving target. I think our largest expense there is when we have a prisoner who, plain English, doesn't play nice. And they ruin the cell with bodily fluids, and our custodians are not trained or certified to clean that, so we ended up calling in ServPro. Last bill we received from ServPro was $950. Prisoner ended up, ruining 2 cells with some serious biohazard material. And so again, that's, while 90% probably 98% of our prisoners do, behave, and not all of them are there over a weekend. Again, that could just be a quick arrest. They're out on the road, they come in, get processed, and they're pushed out. But when people are in there for an extended period of time, things do happen. So that's one of those parts of that moving cost. We had a few different cleanings that had to occur this year.
Too much information.
Yeah, but I mean, it's the reality, And testing accreditation, you'll see the reduction there, and that's by moving out of CALIA. We are at the Tier 3 State of Connecticut accreditation level. We achieved that through Lieutenant Jezerski here at a very early pace. If you're on social media and you follow other local towns around us, these guys are just starting to get to Tier 3. We've been there for, what, a year? Year and a half at this point. So she did a tremendous amount of work to get our town to that point. CLIA standard is the same thing as that. There's just some more standards added to it. So I think speaking to the commission, the realization was, we had a handful of standards here initially. Once this was implemented, it gave us 145 policies. CLIA was going to add more. My thought was we need to, crawl before we can walk and walk before we can run. If we were going to add another almost double on top of that, it just didn't make sense because we weren't even familiar with the current one. So we backed out of that program for the time being. Well, yes, we have paid for it. We still are attached to it, so we're not. It's not like we gave them money and they threw us out the door. So if we are to get better at, get more familiar with the current setup and we go back into that, then that may be a cost again in the future. But we're still attached to the CLIA process, just not going with it. So there's no payment that is due this fiscal year, and that's where we're seeing the reduction.
Okay, so that brings us to just a budget of $3,666,345 after the Board of Selectmen's changes and the First Selectmen's changes, so an overall increase of 9.30%. Maybe at the end of, when we do. So, again, what sort of the message that we've been saying to everybody is that we're trying to do the best we can to present a budget that's affordable to our residents. So, I appreciate the diligence with which you're, paying attention to everything from the cost of the meals, but feel free if you can come up with anything else to bring it forward to us, because it's
2 more officers?
I was kind of thinking in the other direction. Yeah, because it's a tough year.
Well, no, and I understand it, and I think just by looking at the overall and seeing that 9% increase, by adding these other 2 things that kind of already existed in town, there's not an overall increase. Yes, there's a small, the actual budget, what I requested this year is much smaller than that 9%. We just have to factor in these other 2 things, no different than the IT budget, right? That got absorbed from other departments. That's what's driving us to that 9% increase. I think if we reduce those numbers from it, the police department would have probably half of that as an increase.
And maybe, Kevin, if that is something that we could, figure out what would the increase be if we accounted for those, the holiday pay and whatever, then you don't have to do it right now, but I think that would be, a nice little asterisk to add to our budget books that as we move forward with deliberations.
So if you back those items out,
Yeah.
what would it be?
Yeah,
Right.
Get it?
just, that seems like it would be.
So
See-
it's holiday pay, and what was the other one? Longevity, the shift difference?
Right, because the one was 11 point
Yep.
77, and then 221.
Okay. I'll do it for our next meeting. I think Monday we meet.
Yeah, Monday we will,
So I'll have it for you guys this
Yeah.
weekend, but Monday we can present it.
yep. All right, any other questions for Chief?
Anything in the capital?
No,
Denise, did you want to go over capital now?
that's what I was just gonna say, because I think we've got some stuff on So we have the 10-year and the current year, so we're just going to look at the current year. So first, so we have the camera upgrades for 17,000.
27.
Oh, right, with our recommended to 27,000. We started off at 17. So, I know we talked about this in the CIP committee, and, I don't know, Chief, if you just want to, talk a little bit about what the camera purchases.
Okay. All right, so when we moved into the department, renovations were going on. We had a pretty robust camera system that was in place in the initial plans for this, but as change orders came about and different parts of the project came up and there was some unrealized expenses through it, we had to make cuts, right? So over the the course of the build, there were some things that as we walked around, Chief Finkelstein walked around, we looked at, we all conversed, and some of the things we thought we could kind of get away with at the time, and maybe come back at a later date and add these things. And cameras were a major part of that. Right now, we have a couple spots in the building that are not covered, and I think is a huge liability. I just had the state down here with Homeland Security. They just did a security risk assessment through the building. They actually recommended more than what I'm asking for here. So that's something I'm gonna have to present to the commission here soon, but also to the town, because it's part of requirements that the building has. So I kind of already got ahead of them with this, and they just reaffirmed what we were already thinking. So I think with what's here on the exterior of the building and on the interior spaces, we have an area where a prisoner is walked out by an officer from the holding cells out to the front, is not covered by cameras. Can't have that. There's a blank space that is about 40 feet long, and there've been no issues, but there's a potential for a claim. And if we don't have that covered by camera, it's going to cost a lot more than the money to put one in there.
Chief, do you have an updated quote
I have from
with the new upgrades and everything that Homeland Security recommended?
no, so they gave me, we did the walk around. I mean, that was just part of everything they were
Okay.
looking at. I don't have that with me here.
Okay.
Yes. Near the elevator, we had some vandalism in the public bathroom that's there, and that's behind a closed door. Dispatch has access to all the department cameras inside and out. But that hallway was one of the reductions we had. It has access to the elevator, which can go upstairs. So if somebody goes behind that closed door for the time being, we don't know what they're doing in that hallway. Again, we had some vandalism, couldn't prove exactly who it was in the bathroom by the time it occurred from when it was found.
And you're not saying a camera in the bathroom? Just
Not in the bathroom,
entrance to-
correct. In that hallway, so we have, once they leave the front of the building and go into that hallway, we have a camera right there. So it shows if somebody goes up the elevator or somebody goes to the bathroom, right? Not in the actual bathroom. And then there are a few exterior cameras. We've had some issues at the department, like kind of the field services building had a few years back, and that they had upgraded some of the security measures around that facility. So we have some blank spots for the outside. So this will cover all the blank areas that we currently have at the facility.
Any questions on yours? No. So I think we should be good.
Okay.
And, as Regina is with the police commission, and she had requested to speak, I was going to put her down in public discussion, but since this would allow the rest of the police force to leave if they wanted to, would anyone like to make a motion to allow the police commissioner to address the Board of Finance at this point?
I think she's entitled under this agenda item to, I don't think we need a motion for that.
Always confusing with police commissioner. Yeah.
I'm Regina Hitchery, one of the police commissioners, and really wanted to come and make a few comments in support of the budget that's been proposed. Mike and Dane and the others have done, we think, a good job in kind of keeping it confined. And as you can see, the number of 9 or 10% really isn't that because of budget reasons, and we'll be working hard to keep within that, and make sure the police are doing its job. But we also wanted to express from the commission our concern that the Board of Selectmen were not able to support our request for 2 additional headcount, which are 2 half headcounts. They'd be ones that would start halfway through the year. And we think probably the police department is a little unique in town, that a new employee coming on generally doesn't mean they're ready to work. We have somebody in the academy now, and it takes close to a year from the point they join, they go to the academy, they come back and do field training. And we can see on the horizon several real and potential retirements as our workforce ages, and the lack of capacity in the region to supply, say, ready-made policemen who just happen to want to come and work for East Lyme. We've been fortunate in the past about that. Our rates these days aren't great on a relative basis, so that's part of the factor. So we, I'm happy that a couple of you asked for the information about how we compare, because good policing often means you are keeping your numbers down. That's a better outcome than, boy, your numbers are up, you need more people. And we want to see that as citizens, we are able to provide that policing capacity. But as a taxpayer, I get it too. None of us want a tax increase. So thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, and of course, thank you for your work on the police commission. More than welcome.
So Denise, do you want to switch page real quick? So I was able to crunch those numbers real quick. It's only 2 numbers.
Okay.
If we take out the holiday pay and we just leave longevity shift diff same as last year, we're at 5.3.
Thank you. That's
Now I don't want
That's
to
helpful.
save this.
okay.
Yeah, I'm not going to save it. I don't want to ruin that work paper.
All right. So I think we can move on to the next item, which is the East Lyme Fire Service. And welcome. Bill Bundy, the podium.
Good evening. I'm Bill Bundy. I'm the fire chief / fire marshal. I do have an annual report that I do have a hard copy. I was under the impression that I know Kevin does have it electronically, so I do have one copy that I can present now if you want, but,
I'll print it. And
okay,
pass it.
I do have that. I do have also a small slide deck which kind of highlights some of the points that are in the annual report, so some of the questions that you were asking Mike will be in there, so hopefully that'll kind of tee things up for us.
Is that the one Eric sent this morning? I could
Yes.
print? Okay, I'll print copies. Right.
But you got the slide deck also, right?
Yep.
And I know in our books, Deanne had given us or presented sort of the changes that took place for the, so are you going to address?
Yeah,
that too,
I'll
just
touch
to-
on some of that and see how it ties into some of the budget requests and some of the increases that were a result
Kind
of
of
that.
a
so.
monumental
Yep.
change.
Yeah, over the last couple of years, we've basically revamped the entire service. We brought the East Lyme Fire Service together where it consolidated the volunteer services, the Niantic volunteers, Flanders volunteers, in addition to the paid staff. So we're all operating under one budget now. So a lot of the increases that you will see is because there's an absorption of all of those budgets together. Threw that in there. That's in that annual report. It's just kind of a message from where we are and where we're going. I'm not going to bore you with that. We'll go to our organizational breakdown. Currently, our service has 2 paid chief officers, myself and a deputy. Although it says 11 full-time firefighter EMTs, that's how many positions we have. We recently just lost one who went to another municipality, another career department for personal reasons. So he's moved on. So we do have a current full-time opening. As of the drafting of this, we have 5 part-time firefighter EMTs, which supplement, and I'll get into that a little bit later when we start talking about how the shifts work. 2 part-time deputy fire marshals. They're actually inspectors. They are sworn in through the municipality. They can assist with investigations and inspections. Primarily, we use them currently is for large events. You may see them wandering around during East Lyme Day. They help us with some of the vendors and the fireworks and whatnot. And again, I'll touch on that as we move forward. And as of the drafting of this, which was in December, we had 12 volunteer firefighters. And I'm going to get into a little bit about the volunteer service because a lot of the service was dependent upon the need and the assumption that we were utilizing volunteers. And that may not be the case. Like I said, as of December 24, we had 12 volunteer firefighters. We hired 2 of them to be part-time firefighters. 1 enlisted in the military, and 5 have left for college. So when we start in January, that number drops to one volunteer. And when I say volunteer, I'm going to refer to that being an active volunteer, somebody who's certified, somebody who's actually responding. Dan's going to pull double duty.
Yeah.
Nope,
No, wrong way.
community. I note a couple of things of where the service came from. It references all the way back to 1876 of a gentleman by the name of William Cutting who lost his residence here, so it was kind of like what springboarded the need for a service. Some of the apparatuses and how these are all taken from obviously from a New London Day article in 1910. Some of our headlines from 2024. As we all know, we had a tragic incident. We had a double fatality as a result of a fire here in town. We had an evacuation at the high school. We had a rash, and I say a rash, a series of arson fires, little fires here and there that we worked collectively with the police department, and 2 teams were charged. A marine rescue where we rescued a couple of women in the river, and as everyone knows, in the fall, we had monumental brush fires. Breakdown of our current structures. Our Station 1 is our headquarters over on Grand Street, which consists of 2 buildings, and I put the dates in there of 1923 and 1957. And I know recently headquarters did receive a new roof as part of an upgrade, and I know that may come into some of the conversation when we start talking about capital and some of the improvements on our buildings. Station 2, which is actually a state-owned building, but we do maintain it, 1976 up on West Main Street. And then we have the Flanders Station over on the north end of town, built in 1979. I do provide a list of our fleet. This gives you the year and dates of potential refurbishing or renewal or repurchasing of replacement of vehicles for all of our engines, ladders, and our rescues, as well as our specialty vehicles, which consists of chief vehicles, the boat, forestry, and some of our service vehicles. If you note, Boat 1, it was a 1969 Boston whaler. It is currently out of commission. It is at end of life, and that is something that we will be asking for a replacement in our capital projects. Because the other boat is not. It's more of a river boat. It's not something that's going to go out on the sound and affect any sort of rescues or any sort of emergency response. Talk about our fire district. This is what we're required to respond to, 42 square miles, which consists of 34 square miles of land, 8 square miles of water. Here's where we did have some change in our staffing with regard to the schedule. Due to the collective bargaining with the union, our firefighters went to what they call a 24/48 schedule with a Kelly day. Now that 24/48 would be if you work Sunday, you would have the next 48 hours off. Your next due shift would be on a Wednesday. You'd have the next 2 shifts off, and then your next shift would be a Saturday. Their schedule runs from a Sunday through Friday, Saturday being a Kelly day, which means they don't work a Saturday. So every 3 weeks, they're going to get that third day. They're going to get that Saturday off. And we're going to get more into that when we start talking about the staffing. We fill Saturdays with part-timers because the full-timers do not work that Saturday because of their Kelly day. If you go back to what I just said before, we had 5. We're down to 2 part-timers. We're in the process of onboarding a couple of more. So in lieu of a part-timer working a Saturday in those stations, we have to hire back or order back the full-timers. And if they get ordered back on a Saturday, per their collective bargaining agreement, they are working at double time. So when we start looking at the line items and you see the overtime line item, that's where the majority of that is getting eaten up because of that Saturday Kelly day. We currently have 2 firefighters at station headquarters and Flanders in the north end of town 24/7. So there's 2 firefighters, there's 4 firefighters on full-time on each shift. Up until, I believe it was February of this year, we were also responsible for operating and staffing the East Lyme ambulance. But because of the new agreement that we have, and I think that's what you were alluding to, we are no longer staffing the ambulance. We supplement the ambulance in an R1 capacity, which is we respond in an engine to help them. We may get there first, initiate first aid, but we are not staffing that. The other parts of the day in Station 2, and I call it Station 2 up in Rocky Necks area, we try to staff that station from 8 in the morning till 10 at night. And that's typically either on an overtime basis or a part-timer basis. So we haven't been staffing it during the day. We're only staffing it in the evening because we have currently the East Lyme ambulances staffing their ambulance during the daytime. And then we still have the 4 guys. In the evening time, we try to put another guy there because that's when people are getting home. But I know of the 112 hours that we would be covering at that at Station 2, we're averaging 50 hours of part-time work, which either means we're not going to staff it the remaining time, or we have to pay overtime to put somebody in that station. I know somebody was asking about data and trends, and this is where I'll get into some of that. From July of last year to the end of December of last year, we ran our numbers. And during that time period, again, I mentioned we had 12 volunteers. Volunteer 1, now that's not one volunteer, that's identified as volunteer 1, during that time period responded 29 times. Volunteer 2, 25, and so forth and so down as you get on that chart. There were 1,963 calls between July and December. That amounts to just under 4% of those calls. A volunteer responded, leaving the rest of the service to be covered by town employees, either a full-time capacity or as a part-timer. Here's as of January 1 to current. Number of volunteers who responded in January was 1. They went to 1 call. February was 2, 4 calls, and so forth. So you see the trend is really moving in a downward fashion in terms of the response and the, I don't want to say reliability, but us having the ability to rely on us being supplemented by volunteers. And again, this is in your annual report, the links for these. Everybody, or maybe not everybody, but there's might be a misconception that this is a unique problem to the town of East Lyme, that we are the only ones suffering this shortage of volunteers, and we must be doing something wrong. We're not marketing, we're not going out and trying to attract these people. These are 3 articles by national publications from across the country that shows that this is the trend nationwide. Volunteerism is down in the fire service because of a variety of reasons. Some would say, excuse me, some would say that this is something that happened recently. Well, we went back 10 years. 2014, and I'm going to use the term volunteer being active, you had 84 active volunteers in 2014. I came to town in 2022, and you had 43. So you lost 50% in just that period of time. And then as you continue over the next couple of years, you see where that trend has continued to drop to where we are today, or at the end of this, at the end of the year last year, at 12. Just more stats of how this changes, year to year. I'm not going to go into all the particular numbers. It is going to be in your packet, but those are the numbers as we're taking from our data. And you can see over a 10-year period, from 2014 to January of this year, you've had a 98% reduction in volunteering. This recently came out. This person, Brandon Young, did a fire study within the state of Connecticut. Every municipality, every fire department was contacted and filled out a survey. And I believe, based on the report that I received, only 3 departments, or 3 towns, 6 departments, did not participate. And this is showing you the reduction in volunteering, and I believe it was going back to 2017, 2018, where we're talking about a 50% decrease in volunteering within the state of Connecticut based on the recent study.
Yep.
Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry.
I was looking at it. If you look at the bottom, the green, what they did highlight was that in order to supplement this or offset this, there's been an increase in hiring of career or going to combination departments of just under 7%, 6.5%. So towns have recognized that they need to do something.
that they need to provide this service, because where you were relying on your volunteers before to come out and staff that, we don't have that anymore. Somebody asked about call volumes with regard to the police department. We went back to 2009 up to current. In 2009, the service responded to just 2,100, a little over 2,100 calls. The end of 2023 and 2024 last year, we were up just over 3,500 calls. So we've shown over the last 10 years, a 47% increase in call volume. Yeah. Just another graph to depict that. We'll go on to the next one. We were up just under 4% from the year prior, so the trend is continuing to go up. Somebody asked about predictions. At the current trend, over the next 10 years, we'll be projected to go over just under 5,100 calls at the rate we're going.
Can I just interrupt 1 second? So when you say calls, that is not just
It's an
fire.
emergency call. An emergency call. An emergency run, whether it be a fire, EMS, something that somebody has dialed 911 or made an emergency call requesting an emergency service, emergency response for some sort of an emergency service.
I know lots of times people say, geez, I fell, but, the fire truck came.
Right.
So I always like to take this opportunity
Yep.
to explain, why that.
This slide, I'm trying to illustrate, we went back to 2003. At that point, you had 6 career firefighters, full-time firefighter EMTs. And over the course of the next 10 years, that line stayed the same. I refer to this as the condiment page. We're trying to catch up now. You see it? We're trying, and that's exactly what we're doing. We are trying to catch up. We showed in 2017, 2018 an increase, and then it was of 2 people, and you stayed status quo. And now we've hired to where we are at 11. And this just kind of all ties it in together. Call volume going up, volunteering dropping down, and that paid combination firefighter part-time kind of stayed stagnant for a while, but as it relates comparatively to the call volume, we're kind of like dropping a little bit. And now I'll get into the actual budget, and this is just some of the things that are in there that we do. That in spite of all of this, we're out in the community. We're responding to the calls. We're doing training. We're training we're in the schools. We're participating in outreach, community outreach. Eric and I, on the marshal side, we're still doing the fire prevention. All of the things that are associated with this. And it really comes down to we are doing more with a lot less. There we go. We'll go right to the bottom. We're looking at a 26% increase on my budget. But I go back to what I said before. This is the absorption of 3 budgets. Because things that were in the fire marshal budget, which was a standalone budget, has been absorbed in some of these line items. The Flanders volunteer fire budget, the Niantic volunteer fire budget, and now you've created this one East Lyme Fire Service budget. Starting at the top, the marshal and deputy salaries shows a 6.6 increase. That increase is solely by virtue of the fact that our hours increased. That's going from a 37.5-hour work week to a 40-hour work week. There's no wage increase. There's no dollar per hour wage increase. That is a 0% in terms for that. So the only increase that that's showing is the fact that we're working more hours in a week. Administrative assistant, that shows 46%. And that's because last year, the administrative assistant was a part-time position, and then midway through the year, that position went to a full-time position. I believe it was 30 hours. This is to also make her in line with us working a 40-hour work week, and the benefit to that is that, and we'll jump ahead when you start looking down at the bottom at the revenue line, she's exclusively responsible for the scheduling of all of our inspections, which generates revenue. She's the one that are lining these things up. She's the one in the office making the phone call. She's the one processing all the invoices. She's the one that's taking care of all the financial part of that. So that increase is going from last year as a part-time position to this year, making her whole with us at 40 hours and not 30 hours. So that's actually putting 10 more hours of her, because she was already a full-time position.
And Bill, just so this came up when we were implementing ADP and implementing a new system. When we looked at everyone that works in public safety, it's standardized. Everyone's works 40 hours, and we saw there was 2 individuals that don't work 40 hours that work like with the rest of the non-public safety employees. So, in an effort to standardize all public safety to 40 hours a week, that's where this 6.7% comes in, and it does not have a GWI like every other non-affiliated position. Sorry, Bill.
The next is the union firefighters line item. That is looking to add, and as when I gave you the staffing breakdown, we have 11 spots. We're looking to create the 12th spot, which the way with the 2 stations in coverage, it requires 4 per shift, and 4 per shift, 3 shifts is 12 physical bodies. We only have 11, so that 12th position is filled on overtime. So we're looking to make that whole, and then looking to add in January 1st, add another position to try to catch up with the curve of us being so far behind, and that's what's generating that high percentage.
So it's 1.5.
1.5, right.
Full-time equivalent.
Part-time employees is actually, we're showing a reduction because we were hoping by adding full-time positions, we would have less need for the part-time position. But we do have to rely on them for those shifts that we can't cover. Longevity, I think we worked that out. Like every other department, that's just is what it is type thing. If you look at the next block of line items, pretty much everything stayed 0. OSHA, vehicle maintenance, radio maintenance, building maintenance, small equipment, training, training and prevention. That's where it jumps. And the reason for that is because, again, that's the training for the whole service. That includes the fire marshal's office for our certifications that we need to maintain in order to do our inspections and our investigations. That's for training if somebody were to express an interest to join one of the volunteer companies, to put them through certification so that they become a certified firefighter so that they can respond, or any of the annual recertifications like EMT refreshers, things like that, for the whole service, not just one particular department. We have, and I want to mention this because it was mentioned earlier, we do a fair amount of our own training. We've just recently had 2 of our employees attend EMSI school. They are now instructors, so they once they pass their registry, they'll be able to do the recertifications for all of our EMTs where we were sending out before. So that's a good thing. A lot of the things that we get charged for training are things that we can't certify. Because we are an OSHA state, so we are required to have, if you want to be an operational person and have to be able to direct the operations at an emergency scene, you need to have certain certified fire classes. You need to be a fire officer 1, a fire officer 2, and you can go and attend free training to learn that, but you need to get certified and they have the state come in, you need to test, and that's where the charges come into play. And a lot of those classes, depending on which class it is anywhere from $500 to $1,500. And when you start multiplying that by the amount of people, or if you're gonna send somebody to go get firefighter 1 so that they can even put on the turnout coat, those are long drawn out classes, and there's a pretty substantial cost that's involved with that. And again, that's for the entire service, that's just not one department. You saw FMO training, we zeroed that out, we put that in the whole budget, on the whole training budget. Fire hydrant maintenance, that's one I wish I could give away, but I can't. That's just
That
something.
gets paid to water and sewer.
Yeah, that's water and sewer, so.
Should not be, I mean, that's part of the system.
Right.
This was on here last year, and
Yeah.
I wasn't really crazy about it. I mean, they use it to flush the system, so it's not really a fire thing.
Well, Paul,
But then why do the people in the north end of town have to pay taxes for this when they're not getting the benefit from it?
it was discussed last night in the water and sewer meeting. That's 76,000. They're trying to, for next year, to make that a $400,000 line item. They're looking to charge about 500 a hydrant, and there's 131 hydrants. So it comes out to be 807,000-ish.
Is this what every town does, or is every town charging this, or is it included in the utility?
So I can't. So I know some of the comparable situations they were talking about was Veolia and New London, so New London subcontracts out their water and sewer. It sounds like, or their water to a private contractor that charges, I think, north of $500 per hydrant to maintain. Currently, we pay $91, but that's something that's.
I think they use the hydrants more than the fire service does.
I shall keep my personal comments out of this one because I agree with you. But so that's something maybe the chairman of the water and sewer department can talk about. But yeah, that's ongoing discussions there for that line.
It's out of my jurisdiction, but I just don't think it's, like I said, it's part of the water system.
Well, if you'd like to transfer it out of my budget, I wouldn't object. Next line would be the volunteer expenses, and this is where we've allotted, essentially it's $6,000 per department, where before the departments had their own operating budget, and the town would, whatever dollar figure was associated with that, that's kind of like their, I'll call it an operating budget, but that's for like recruitment and retention, things for them that they, I don't want to say spend however they see fit, but to utilize for their internal program. So that's $12,000, $6,000 per department, Flanders and Niantic. And this is a new line, medical supplies, because of what I think we alluded to earlier. Some of the changes that we had is the East Lyme Ambulance Fund is now entered into an agreement with the town to provide this service. And part of that, prior to this, our fire trucks, our people our firemen who are responding in a first aid capacity, we would get the equipment from them, Band-Aids, oxygen equipment, things to essentially go out and render first aid. With them going on their own, they're kind of taking that with them. So in order for us, we've applied to the state and we've received our own R1 license, so all of our engines and all of our firefighters who are responding have the ability to go provide first aid service, but we need to outfit those vehicles with that equipment. There's certain mandated a list of equipment that we have to have in order to maintain that license, and some of that comes out of this money that, if you go out and you get there before the ambulance and you put oxygen on somebody and there's a mask, where before we would get it from the ambulance, now we have to supply that ourselves. So that's part of that expense, and so that's a new line. Telephones, we're on the town's group, so we have all the chief officers. Some of the rigs have cell phones for that. FMO phones, we've zeroed it out because we put it in the main budget, the main line rather. Uniforms, and I'll jump to the next one, FMO uniforms. Again, we combine that, so that's uniforms for like if the Some of it's contractual with the collective bargaining with the union. They get so much money per year so that they can go out and buy new, trousers, boots, things that they're going to need to go out on a daily basis. We're also outfitting volunteers if they need uniforms and things like that if they were to come in. So that's just one big consolidation, and that's what's showing a big percentage because it's a new line item essentially. Miscellaneous supplies, again, same thing. We used to have where you would have each department may have had 2,500 or 1,000, 1,500. That's now, that 10,000 is for the whole service. So it's, in the event that you need to buy something for, you need to buy a shovel or buy a rake or whatever, something on the fly, in order to do that, we have that. We jump down to the revenue. We did institute a couple of years ago, as you know, the fire marshal's office, we do, we bill for inspections, and we also bill for plan review. It's estimated this year, and I don't have the exact number, and I apologize, I should have grabbed it before we came here tonight, but we're on target to receive about $100,000 in revenue this year. We spent a lot of money in the fall on equipment with the brush fires. Hose, spent a lot on overtime.
Foam.
Huh?
The foam.
Foam. We couldn't keep foam quick enough. But I'm happy to say, and where I'm waiting for it to arrive, we put in for reimbursement. We tried to recoup some of this from various organizations or various agencies, and if they hold true to what they're saying, we're looking to recoup close to $33,000 from the state. So that will hopefully offset some of that we had to come back and ask. I think we had to come back and ask some contingency for some of the equipment earlier, but hopefully that'll offset that. We're projecting with the increase in hours of the admin, and if we keep the part-time hours and we can start utilizing our part-time inspectors a little bit more, we might be able to generate a little bit more in terms of more inspections. Right now it's just Eric and I, so we can only do what we can do in addition to our regular hours. If we get a couple of more people to come in and help us out on a part-time basis that are already on our books, just utilize them a little bit more. We're estimating that we could probably get around $150,000 in revenue for next year.
Can you just, so which buildings do you inspect and what do you charge, and how does that charge relate to what other towns might charge for similar?
We follow the fee structure is the same fee structure that most of our counterparts utilize. It's based on the state's recommendation. Inspections are done, life safety inspections are done based on your classification of assembly. An assembly like a school, now we don't charge the school, but I'll use the school as an example. A school is every year because it's an educational assembly. A restaurant, that's an assembly, we would inspect that annually. And all those are the hotels, those type of things. Those are annual inspections. And I should have brought that. I didn't realize I was going to get asked that. I have it. We're around 1,000 annual inspections that we're required to do. And I know that when we are looking to do the ordinance for creating this fee structure, we're falling short. We're years, in some cases, we're years behind. There are some assemblies that we just don't get to unless there's a complaint because we're still trying to maintain what we're doing. The amount of money that we charge per inspection is based on the square footage. Off the top of my head, 3,000 square feet or less is, I think it's $60. 3,001 goes to $120. So you start, and it goes up, accordingly.
I guess my question was more like, or the point I was trying to get to is knowing how behind we are in annual inspections. Is there, if we added someone who was just focused on inspections,
100%.
would we offset that, and what would those numbers look like?
When I had made that's a great point. When I made the presentation a couple years ago to do this, that person theoretically, and more probable than not, would pay their own salary based on the inspections that they would do. We also do plan reviews. Now, we get whatever the building department charges for a plan or for a permit application, we get 65% of what they charge to do the plan review. So you get some of these ginormous, we're gonna get 65% of that. That's also something that person, because not only can they do inspections, but they're also gonna be certified that they would be able to do plan reviews. So the more plan reviews and granted, it's based on the permits that come in, but that point exactly is having somebody to come in and work Monday through Friday and do nothing but inspections would pay for itself. And that in total brings the operating budget to 2.5 million at 26.09.
I have a couple of questions. Do you respond to the correctional facility? And the reason for my question just is we are, the town gets payment in lieu of taxes for state-owned property, but it's been grossly underfunded each year. And I'm wondering if our resources are responding to the Correctional Institute or to Rocky Neck State Park,
Well, I can tell you this, and prior to the signing of the agreement with the East Lyme Ambulance Association, East Lyme Ambulance Fund, when we had paid town employees operating and manning that ambulance, they were going to York CI, I don't want to say daily, but often. Same thing during the summertime with Rocky Neck State Park. They're still, and I don't want to say taxing, we're still responding as a service to those locations. In some cases, it may be now us in the capacity of an R1 because the ambulance is tied up and they've got to go to Rocky Neck for, a child who got stung by a bee or whatever, and they're going to go first until the arrival of the ambulance gets there. Same thing with the prison. So the short answer to that is yes, we respond to those state properties routinely.
I'm just wondering if this might be, added ammunition that we could take to our state representatives to fight for more pilot and, explain what we're.
So, Denise, I just ran this numbers and sent it to Nick Menapace and Martha Marks. Across East Lyme, we have $144 million worth of state property, right? So the state has $144 million worth of property assessed in town. If that was at our mill rate, that would be just shy of $4 million. This year we are receiving less than $750,000 from the state. So they're funding less than 25% of what they probably should.
So it's not just that we're not getting that, we have the added expenses associated with their being here.
Their infrastructure that's here, yeah. So,
There
yeah,
also used to be a payment you could get for responding on 95, but I think that dried up as well.
They put a stop on that funding. And to your point about York CI, they just installed, and we're going out to meet some of the contractor and receive some of the training on a couple of fuel cells out there. So they're actually increasing some of their target hazards that we would be the primary responding force in the event of an emergency for that. So I don't know that we're going to get any sort of an offset for that, but if something were to happen, it's not going to be a state agency that's going to be the initial responder. It's going to be us. So.
Another question at the staffing at Station 2. In the off season, assuming if there's that many responses to Rocky Neck, which I would think would be more seasonal, can that affect the staffing?
Well, that's a great point. That's exactly where we are right now. That's why we I'll say during peak season or during Rocky Neck season, we were staffing Station 2 during the day and the evening time. Currently, we're not because we're off season. So there's an ambulance, the East Lyme ambulance is stationed their ambulance there. But in the event that they're out doing a run somewhere else in town, during the daytime, there's no firefighter there with EMT that's going to respond currently.
And, you know, I just also want to make a point now that the East Lyme ambulance is fully responsible for all of this. It's created an added safety feature for the town, because prior to that, it could be a firefighter going to Norwich Hospital or wherever with a patient, taking them out of the vicinity in
Right.
the case of an emergency.
It's keeping the firefighters in town
Yeah.
in the event for another emergency, while also adding a level of insurance, because they're stationed throughout the town. You've got firefighters in the north side, you got firefighters on the south side. So, and again, if the ambulances, because again, those calls are coming in, it's not uncommon to have 2 calls run simultaneously, and you're going to get excuse me, you're going to get a fire truck with an ambulance or with an EMT and a firefighter there. It's just as qualified and can provide the same level of service. The only thing they're not doing is transporting. So you'll have that. Excuse me, I'm sorry.
So I think those were my questions. You know, I tend to look to Richard because he often has questions. And then that leaves Lauren with all of her questions answered before we get to her.
I try to bring everything so that you know, I try to front load everything up front so that way.
Scott might have a question.
Yeah, I think Scott, okay. Scott?
Thank you. I just do have one, and I just wonder if you might expand a little bit on what you said, earlier in your presentation about the reduction in volunteers. I appreciate that, you said the trend that you're seeing here in East Lyme is consistent with what you're seeing, in lots of other places, and that makes a lot of sense to me. So I guess my question is, what sorts of things are you or other towns doing to try and increase interest in volunteering, to maybe get back to a higher proportion of volunteer-based support?
We've started. We went back into the schools. We are involved with the EMT programs in the school, where we're helping out. East Lyme High School's got a very robust emergency medical technician program, and we're assisting them in getting some of our kids, I say kids, certified. We've had conversations to try to model that with the fire side. We have our own fire instructors, so we're going to try to implement some. You might have a high school senior that doesn't want to do EMS, that just wants to go put fires out. So we're going to try to reintroduce that. We've had discussions amongst ourselves where we're going to try, the cops do a police academy, Citizens Police Academy. Well, we're trying to draft up maybe a Citizens Fire Academy, something that would generate, bring some people in from the town to, see what we do and maybe generate some interest. There's a big push. I attend some of the state chief meetings, and right now some of the legislation that's being proposed is funding for recruitment and retention. Those are some of the things that we're trying to do, but the problem is, and I think what some of the data that we're receiving, why some of this is dropping, the volunteerism that is because of the mandates that are imposed upon somebody who's doing something other than firefighting. You're a husband, you're a wife, you've got a job, you've got children, and now you're expected, where before, years ago, like when I first started, you didn't have to go to school to get certified to be a fireman. They gave you a set of gear, you drilled on Tuesday nights, you went out and did some things, but now in order to be that volunteer, there's an expectation that you're going to meet the OSHA requirements. You're going to go to a class, you got to learn how to do all these things. So I don't have that answer on what's the magic potion. If I did, I'd bottle it and I'd give it to every other department in the state, across the country. We're all struggling with that. We go out, we try to be, we do public awareness, we're trying to show ourselves out. That's why you see the trucks out there, you see the guys out there, trying to bring awareness. But at the end of the day, we're up against the battle of life in general, and it's hard to balance that. And I don't know if that answers your question. I don't know that we have that magic answer of, other than what we're already currently doing and trying to do.
And just to clarify, with the volunteers, do they get paid when they?
There used to be that stipend programs at each individual department, where if you came, you made so many calls. A lot of that came back through the ambulance association with ambulance reimbursement money. So I really can't answer to what they're doing now.
There was a paper.
There's also the tax.
There was not a stipend on fire. If you went to a fire call.
No, it was just EMS, right? Okay.
It was just EMS.
An abatement, tax abatement for activity. So those are some of the incentives. But the short answer is they don't get paid to be a volunteer, because then it kind of defeats the purpose of being a volunteer. You're not volunteering at that point.
Well,
We've actually.
You're looking to a bunch of people who put in a bunch of hours.
Well, it's
Right.
getting to what, I mean, I joined the fire service when I was 30 years old. I was CPA during the day, so I'm working 50 hours a day, so I'm helping my town do that. So for 6 months, I'm going to fire school nights and weekends.
Right.
And then you take and then, I get to do the thing, but nobody can really do that these days.
Right.
You can't, I don't even know where you go around here to take firefighter one.
Well, if you're interested, we can find them for you. I mean, anybody for that matter. Anybody for that matter. But to that point, that's a great point.
No, I mean, I'm already certified. I'm not going through it
No,
again.
no, but we've had some people recently come to us and say, hey, listen, I want to volunteer. I don't know that I want to go to any particular department. I just want to help out the town. So, okay, well, some of them may already be certified. So we've got 3 in the hopper right now that we're trying to onboard. So to your point, are they going to get paid or are they going to volunteer? Well, you know what? If you're going to be here and give 30 hours a week and you're going to help us out, that's what that part-time budget's for. We certify them, we pay them, and then, or if they don't want to get paid and you just want to get your stipend, or however that works out. But it's a matter of getting them here.
So from a finance side of things, we have, I think 2 weeks ago we were talking about, Connecticut has increased their abatement for property taxes. Eligible, you can go from 1,000 to 2,000 now. And then the other thing was, even though they're volunteers, what can you pay them? So from what we were reading, it appears you can pay them, it's got to be less than 20% of what a fireman makes in the area. So in the town of East Lyme, if a step 1 fireman, I think it's like $30.19 or $30.75, they can make 20% of that, which is like $6.
3019.
39. Pretty close.
And it's firefighter. That's the first thing they teach you in fire school. It's firefighter, not fireman.
Oh, see, I'm not qualified.
Fireman is the guy that shoves coal into a locomotive.
Like a Coleman. Okay, I got you. Did not appreciate that.
Sir, I don't know if that answered your question.
No, it's good. I mean, I have no solution to propose myself. I just sort of was curious what kinds of things are being done and whether we can be creative, to appeal to younger people. Maybe there's, have some discussions with those younger people and find out what might make this interesting to do.
This town also has the ambulance adds the dimension to that, because if you go back to that map that shows the all volunteer fire departments, I would guarantee you they're not doing ambulance calls.
You're probably right. The thing with kids, and I say kids, the high school age, and if you go back to the very beginning of the presentation where I talked about we had 5 of them that left. You get that firefighter, EMT, regardless of which lane they pick, and they're in high school and they're all gung-ho, you really get them for 2, maybe 3 years before they develop other interests. They go to college. So then you devote a lot of effort into getting them trained and certified to the point that they can put on turnout gear, grab a hose, put a car fire out, and do all those things. And the next thing you know, it's August and they're going to college and they're not back. And that's not to say that they're not valuable, but that goes on for a period of time until such time that, okay, now I'm going to school in New Hampshire and I'm home on the holidays and I meet somebody, I meet a partner, and life takes over. So we're fortunate if we get 2, maybe 3 years out of somebody when they first join. The other roadblock, if you would, and we just had this happen to us. We had a kid from town, great kid. He's one of the kids that we brought up through the system. He was volunteering both on the ambulance and on the fire side. We made him a part-time fire. We started giving him shifts, working. He's now in another municipality doing full-time work somewhere else. So they use it as a stepping stone. And again, we don't fault that because somebody's going to benefit from that. But those are some of the challenges that we have with retention, and that's something that we're discussing at the chief level all over the state to see what we can do to try to find that magic potion so we can all rest a little easier.
So, we also have some capital stuff,
Capital.
but before we go to capital, anyone have any other questions for Bill? Scott, no? So, we definitely had a lot of discussions in the CIP committee.
Sorry, just getting switch over the camera.
Oh, okay. In the fire service and recommended a few adjustments. And if you want to take it, I know we start off with a fire rescue boat. I think we were very fortunate to have on the CIP committee Don McKenzie, who has been around boats all his career, so that was very helpful.
Well, we've actually had some dialogue with him since then. So for us, it's just a matter of getting a dollar value, because the need is there that we need to replace that. So I think what he has suggested is certainly going to be within our wheelhouse in terms of for meeting an operational need. So I think we're good there.
Utility truck.
Your utility truck?
The utility truck, yeah, okay. Going back to the conversation with the ambulance and them going on their own. The utility trucks that you see driving around town are owned by the ambulance companies. So we were fortunate that we were able to use them for towing the trailers, towing the ATVs, towing the boat, all the things that are associated with that. Like when we had the brush fires, the trailers that had all the foam and the hose, that's the East Line ambulance truck that we were using. Now that they're independent, we don't have a truck to pull anything, so that's what that request was for. It was actually, yeah, no, that's it, yep. I'm in the wrong line.
And then we had the rescue equipment.
Rescue equipment is to replace end-of-life equipment. As I think I mentioned during the CIP meeting, we're the primary response for the water and sewer department with confined space and things like that. Some of the technical stuff, some of that equipment is out of date. It's at end of life. Some of our hydraulic equipment, some of our airbags, some of our extrication equipment. So that's just to bring us back so that we can replace stuff that it's out at end of life.
And
The wrong one.
Tires.
Tires is a big one. 6 of our 9 vehicles in our current fleet are either at or will be operating with non-compliant tires from DOT, and that's for years of, again, not being addressed, where getting them in a replacement cycle. So that money is the tires run between, depending on which vehicle, anywhere from 1,000 to 1,200 per tire. And in some of these cases, you're talking 6 tires per vehicle. So that's where that money comes from. That's where that value comes from.
Overall, comparing East Lyme to other communities, maybe our size in not just population but in square mileage, the number in vehicles in our fleet.
Great point. We've actually looked at that. Eric and I have been studying that, and we are modifying that as we speak to do just that, to reduce the amount of vehicles that we are currently carrying. First of all, because if you don't have the people to get them out of the barn, they're just going to sit there. But essentially, does a town this side need 2 heavy rescues? I say no, which is why we're offloading one and we're outfitting the other one. So to that point, we are looking at that and we are addressing that as we speak.
Because that's been a big
Sure.
focus
Yep.
as well.
Absolutely.
All the costs associated with.
And that's why if at the upper part of that, when we start, and I know we didn't talk about the apparatus reserves and the replacements. Eric and I did a 25-year replacement plan on all of the vehicles, and we did just what you were suggesting. What do we need? What's the current? What's the cost of refurbing it versus replacing? So we're doing just that. We're going through all of our fleet to make it more economical.
Right size.
Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Where are we at now?
SCBA.
Rescue, SCBA. SCBA is just to replace stuff that's out of date. Same thing with turnout gear. We just did a big inventory, so we don't. And again, if you're going to try to attract people, you got to have gear, and a set of turnout gear goes between $5,000 and $6,000 with the turnout coat, the boots, the pants, the helmet, and all of that. So. And then there is a end of life for those as well. So in order to be compliant, so that we're not, violating any of the OSHA standards, that's what that is. That's just to replace that.
Although I think we did take that.
So what we did was, so everyone sees there's a negative 70,000 and a negative 20,000 for hoses and turnout gear. So it was a reduction of $90,000 there. We took that 90,000 and made it 5,000. So you see it says firefighting equipment going from at the very bottom there, it goes from 25 plus a 75 to 100. What we did was, in an effort to make it easier on the fire department as well as the accounting department, if you run out of money in turnout gear, say they needed 75,000 in turnout gear.
Yeah, it doesn't handcuff us
Yeah.
to one particular item, so that we have the ability to replace what we need at that particular point.
Correct. Yep. Perfect. And then the radio upgrades, that was a town-wide decision. We just applied to the state of Connecticut for a grant or for bonding money at the state level for a town-wide radio upgrade. So as opposed to individual departments kind of piecemealing a system together, it's going to be a town-wide approach. Yep.
Anything else?
That's it. Any final?
Thank you.
Thank you
Have a
very
good
much.
evening now. Any questions, please reach out.
Thank you.
Thanks. I do want to just go back to, we didn't touch on capital and IT.
Okay. Scroll up here. If you want to switch cameras, James. So there are 3 cuts that were made to IT's budget proposals. Just going from, so everyone on the first sheet, right beneath general government. So the dark fiber project that IT was proposing, they got that paid for by a grant, so we did not need the $44,000. There's going to be a larger project we're hopeful for next year of getting funding on to connect all of the town's buildings to dark fiber. Does everyone know what dark fiber? For people at home that don't know what dark fiber is, just as, you know, in your neighborhoods, you might have fiber optic, you know, internet, things like that. There's a separate set of fiber cables at the state of Connecticut level that connects, you know, state buildings and other critical infrastructure. They gave us a grant to connect our buildings to each other. So it's essentially we're going to have one network across East Lyme's entire IT infrastructure. Dan, did I explain that good?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So that we're moving forward, or proposing to move forward with a firewall hardware upgrade for $26,000. If we remember, when we just looked at IT's budget earlier in the evening, there was that $34,800 at that miscellaneous supplies line, that technical supplies line, that originally was $35,000 overall. We cut that out of capital, made a little offer and compromise with Mr. Cleary, and gave him $34,000 between his miscellaneous supplies and this computer replacement program. That does kind of extend some of the life of the computers a little out from 5 to 7 years, but in this tough budget environment, sacrifices have to be made. $12,000 to increase storage capacity and the backups for our networks. $15,000 to do the police department and town hall battery backups. So if we lost power, our network wouldn't crash. Townwide server replacements, you will see that next year at $70,000. So in discussions with Dan Cleary, he was proposing to put $35,000 aside almost as a reserve, and then ask for another $35,000 next year to do the whole project, which is right around $70,000. In this budget environment, if that money is just going to sit in a bank account, we much rather zero that out and then next year fully fund the project. Right, just a better use of capital. Townwide secure Wi-Fi cybersecurity upgrades, and then upgrading network switches as well. So it's really just a lot of updating IT infrastructure, and I think that's a lot of the theme across the departments. We didn't touch on emergency management, but just real, you know, the tower phase 2 you see there, and then you see public safety communication infrastructure. You probably, you know, drive around town, you see these towers. There's one at Grand Street. There's some up in Flanders. Those towers, the infrastructure related to the radios and all the computers for those, most of them date to between 2007 and 2009. They're supposed to be upgraded every 7 years. So we're about 10, 12 years behind on upgrading those. And before they start failing on us, we really should invest in that infrastructure, that critical infrastructure, and get that upgraded.
And we actually had instances where
A tree branch fell on a wire, and we lost 911. There was no 911 for a period of time until that tree branch was removed off that wire. So we are working on a microwave redundant system to kind of alleviate that problem, but it's not fully up and running yet.
And we also had issues with radio communication in certain spots in town that
Correct. Rocky Neck, I believe, is a dead zone.
could not get through.
So, yep, take it right in.
Yeah, so there are these dead zones, and part of the way you relieve that is to find a tower space where you can have repeaters and ways to transfer that signal. One of the things that Dan identified, and I think might be very helpful if it works out, there is a tower down in Giants Neck Heights, in that, or at the end of Brainerd Road. And that tower, if that can be activated with, you know, our equipment, would eradicate the dead spots in Old Black Point, Rocky Neck, and some of those areas. If you do a concentric circle around that tower, it would hit those areas. And if you look at a map of East Lyme, that tower is in line with, you know, 2 or 3 other assets that we have going straight up through East Lyme. So it's really a key tower, and we may be able to trade space on that tower with the other towers, the north side of town, and make some agreements with these companies that, you know, provide that service. So he's really figured out some good alternatives, and we're trying to accomplish that.
to public discussion. We no longer have any public here. And board comments. Want to chime in on anything? Scott, how you doing? Still awake?
I'm tired, but I'm good. I just want to thank, both the police and fire teams for putting together great presentations, and looking forward to seeing the details on the police trends. But it's helpful to someone like me who's new to this to hear their presentation. So it helps, I think, in our decision making.
Absolutely. All right. Do I hear a motion to adjourn?
I'll move to adjourn.
Motion has been made and seconded. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Thank you. Have a good night, everyone.
Good night, Scott.